Hey guys, so our project that we're going to work on today is our stuffed animal still life. And just a quick reminder of what a still life is. It's an object or multiple objects that are put together that are non-living because we don't want them to move, to practice real life drawing. So it's to hopefully get us better to drawing in reality in real life at the time, instead of drawing from other pictures or from your imagination. So I have my stuffed animal here. Please try and find an animal that will sit on a table, nothing too big and nothing too small. If it's too small, it's actually a little bit harder to draw and get all those details in. And then when we start, we're going to start with our basic shapes. So we're going to break it down into simplified shapes, basically. And then once we have the idea of the animal down and where they're sitting and how they're located, we're going to start adding the detail to make it more realistic and look exactly how it looks from what we're seeing. Then once we have our drawing down, we're going to go back and add texture to our animal. There are two different types of texture. There's tactile texture and visual texture. So tactile texture is when you can actually go up and touch something and feel how it actually feels. So if I just looked at it and described the bear, it looks fuzzy, right? Fluffy, soft. And I can actually go up and confirm that because I can touch it. Now, visual texture is like implied texture. It's made up kind of texture. So if I go up and touch it, it doesn't necessarily mean that's how it's going to feel. So it's like a picture of tree bark. If I go up and touch the picture, I'm not going to feel the actual bark of the tree. I'm going to feel the texture of the picture. So that would be our visual texture. Or another example is, this is an example a student did for the still life here. They went back in and added the texture like they were supposed to. And it's nice that they have a bunch of little lines for that fur. But if I go up and touch it and expect to feel that texture, I'm only actually feeling the texture of the paper, not the texture that they made. So this is called implied texture, visual texture. All right, so let's get started. So once you have your animal, remember we're breaking it up into basic shapes and we don't want to draw too small. So try and fill your paper up the best you can. So I'm going to start with the head. And you can draw many, many different lines. So it's basically what we're going to end up doing is sketching it out. And you know what? I'm going to go with a marker here just so you can see it a little bit better as I'm drawing. So I won't be able to erase anything. So bear with me. But always use pencil because then you can go back in and erase the lines that you do not want. Or you can also cover them up by depending on how dark or light you draw. So I got the base of my head done. I'm going to go in, and again, we're using basic shapes. I'm going to do his snout, which is almost another circle oval. And then his nose, which is at the top. Okay. His eyes, which are also right next to his snout. And then we have this little kind of white thing around his eyes, different type of fur. Ears, half kind of circles. What you're going to kind of want to really watch for is how big everything is being drawn. So we don't want like a ginormous actual nose if the nose isn't taking up most of his head. Same with his ears. We don't want ginormous ears if his ears are actually pretty small. Okay, so try and get the proportions right. So like his face right compared to his body. We don't want a ginormous head and a little body. Okay, so once I have the basic body down or head down, I'm going to go to my body. So I'm going to sketch that in there. Again, we're sticking with basic shapes for now, and then adding in the detail later. And if you have extra detail on your bear, or I guess stuffed animal, I want you to add those. So my extra stuff would be the bow. He has a bow right here, so I'd have to add that. Okay, so I have his arms so far and his body. Now the tricky part where a lot of people get lost is the legs part. So depending on how you're looking at your bear, so right now we're looking at the bear straight on. So you see the bottoms of his feet. Okay. Otherwise, you could look at from the side view. Okay, so then I would actually want to draw his tail because I would see his tail. And I wouldn't see both eyes. So you got to decide kind of which way you're going to be looking at your animal. And make sure you're drawing it from the view that you are seeing it. So here's the trick to a lot of complications when you're looking from straight on. You're not going to actually draw. So let's say I'm going to grab a different piece of paper here just to show you an example of what I'm talking about. So if I drew my bear real quick. Got his body on there. Okay. So what a lot of people make problems with is they draw their feet like if the animal is doing the splits. So that's telling me that one leg is going out like this. So he's actually sitting like this instead. That's how you drew it. So that's how I'm going to visualize your bear or your stuffed animal. That's not exactly how he was actually sitting. Okay, so to avoid this, what you're going to end up doing is you don't actually see a lot of his legs. You only see the bottom of his feet here and maybe a little part of extra around, but not really any legs. So what I'm going to do is basically draw, because his feet are more of like a circular oval, over top part of his body, so part of his belly. So I'm going to overlap like this, so his 2 feet there. And again, I can't erase because I'm using markers so you can see better, but then you could erase part of his body. And then I can go in and add those extra feet details in there. To make them look even more like feet, okay? And then what I probably also want to do is do almost another layer around, because we have that white layer, or I have that white layer, and then I have the brown layer that also surrounds it as well. So I could go around again, make another layer. That's kind of up to you how you want to do that. Okay, so I have a double layer here. And then also same with his belly. He has a white spot on his belly, and the rest of him is brown. So I can draw that in there as well. And then don't forget, if you have any extras, you got to draw them. So I'd have to draw this bow as well. Draw that in there quick. And do the best you can for how it looks. Okay, so it was a bow. Once we are completely done drawing the basic form, you can go back in and change a couple lines, make it look more realistic to what your stuffed animal looks like. So I can go back in now and the inside of his ears and different things like that, and his mouth. Okay, here's where we're to the point of adding texture. There's a couple tricks of adding texture. Basically, texture's a bunch of different types of lines. Okay, and it depends on how many you use. You could use zigzag lines, swirly lines, maybe little short dashes or long dashes, depending on your texture. So if you notice here on the bear, This texture right here for kind of his snout area is different than the rest of his body. And you can see that visually. So this is a lot shorter and not wavy, where this is wavy and a bit longer. Okay, a bit fuzzier. Same with the color difference. If you don't have colors at home and you don't plan on coloring your still life, I would suggest the more lines you have, the darker your color or texture will look. The less lines you have or the lighter you push, the lighter it will look. So, give an example here. So I'm going to draw his little hair on his head, and it's a bunch of squiggly lines, and they're somewhat long. Okay, so I'm going to go in a bunch of different random directions because that's kind of what it is. And I'll show you here in a second. And I'm going to add a lot of lines really close together because I'm not going to add color to mine. So I want to show that the difference between the browns and the whites. Spots on him. Okay. So that's his forehead. So that's the brown part. Okay, and you notice that this part around his eyes is actually the same texture, but is white. So how do I separate that from the brown part? Well, I do actually the same texture, the same lines, but I would spread them out and have less of them, so it makes it look lighter. So I'll show you an example here. I'm going to color in his eyes here first because they are a glossy black, so they can be a solid color. So I'm going to go in and add that crazy texture, but I'm not going to add as much. Okay, so you see that? See the difference? Same type of texture, same line, but less of them to make them look lighter. So that's an option. Now to change texture, because now this is a totally different texture, same goes here. The least amount of lines, the lighter it is, the more amount of lines, the darker it will look. These lines are going to be short and straight because that's kind of what the texture looks like. I'm going to show you the difference here between his nose and the muzzle part. So again, they're both the same texture, just different colors. Okay, so we got the brown nose with the short texture, and then we got the white muzzle part with also, again, short texture. But the amount of lines is different, so then it looks a little bit different. One other thing I want to mention too is that when you're doing your texture, please go outside of the bounds that we have here. So we don't want to just stick, we'll do an example on his arm here. So his arm is brown and has that wavy texture. I'll give you an example. Okay, so there's a difference between what I did up here on his forehead versus what I did right here on his arm. So on his arm, I kept that texture within the bounds of that first line that I made when I drew his arm. Up on his forehead, I made the lines go past that head drawing that I drew, that line. Please do that. Your texture doesn't stay confined in that one area. Unless it's very, very specific. So like on his foot here, that texture does stay specifically in that area, or same with his eyeballs. But furry texture usually goes beyond the bounds. So please do that. Think about that. Okay, so that's a basic idea of texture. You could get crazy with your texture trying to add texture. You can also, something I want you to think about is the direction. So try and get your directions correct. Like his main fur isn't really going necessarily in a direction, but his snout, if I look at it, it comes out and it goes up, actually, those lines. So then it would be helpful if you drew those lines exactly the direction that they are also going. Same with the bottom of his foot here. So this white fur here actually is going down. So I want to draw those lines in that motion going downward. Hopefully that makes sense. When you are completely done, I would suggest somewhere drawing that line between the table and the background. And then possibly, if you can, see if you can find a shadow somewhere. Where's the shadow? His shadow is a little bit harder to see, but it's right under his butt here. And here's a little bit shadow of his foot. And he actually has a little shadow over here, but it's going off the camera. So then what I want to do is also add that shadow on my picture as well. And I can just completely color in that shadow. But I would like you to try and find where it actually is. And depending on your light is depending on where your shadow will be. See how I colored that all in? All right, if you have any questions for me, I'm not sure if you get stuck on the spot, certainly email me, Schoology or Google Meet. We meet every Thursday. So good luck and have fun with this.